To celebrate the excerpt in the anthology and to honor the work of Saul Bellow, we're delighted to have with us here tonight an Atlantic contributing editor, a best-selling author, and a provocative essayist and cultural critic and literary critic, Christopher Hitchens. And I should say a Bellow-phile second to none, who has an excellent piece in the current 150th anniversary issue on Saul Bellow. And I'm sorry, Christopher, if I said that.
I just thought your introduction was in danger of becoming too generous, if not, in fact, preemptive. And I've only got a few minutes with you, ladies and gentlemen, and I want to make the best use of them. I want to first give you a sense of how Bellow writes. Setting a scene of an old Jew, Holocaust survivor, immigrant to the United States, who has to ride the bus and doesn't like what he sees. Shortly after dawn, or what would have been dawn in a normal sky, Mr. Arthur Samler, with his bushy eye, took in the books and papers of his West Side bedroom and suspected strongly that they were the wrong books, the wrong papers. In a way, it did not matter much to a man of 70 plus. And at leisure. He thought, since he had no job to wake up to, that he might give sleep a second chance to resolve certain difficulties imaginatively for him, and pulled up the disconnected electric blanket with its internal sinews and lumps. It was time to be conscious. Very great the way Bellow can summon anomie and alienation, and the antinomies of that, I think. Soon comes back to him why he's woken somewhat distressed. For several days, Mr. Samler, returning on the customary bus, had been watching a pickpocket at work. The man got on at Columbus Circle. The job, the crime, was done by 72nd Street. Mr. Samler, if he had not been a tall strap hanger, would not, with his one good eye, have seen these things happening. But now he wondered whether he had not drawn too close, whether he had also been seen seeing. The pickpocket himself wore dark shades. He was a powerful Negro, in a camel's hair coat, dressed with extraordinary elegance, as if by Mr. Fish of London, or Turnbull and Asser of Jermyn Street. Mr. Samler knew his England. The Negro's perfect circles of gentian violet banded with lovely gold turned towards Samler, but the face showed the effrontery of a big animal. Samler was not timid. You see how Bellow's asking for trouble here. I don't need any underlining from me, but I'm going to underline it anyway. Samler was not timid, but he had had as much trouble in life as he wanted. A good deal of this would never be accommodated. He suspected the criminal was aware that a tall old white man, passing as blind, had seen the minutest details of his crimes. Staring down, as if watching open-heart surgery. And though he dissembled, deciding not to turn aside when the thief looked at him, his elderly, his compact, civilized face coloured strongly, the short hairs bristled, the lips and gums were stinging. He felt a constriction, a clutch of sickness at the base of the skull, where the nerves, muscles, and blood vessels were tightly interlaced. The breath of wartime Poland passing over the damaged tissues, that nerve spaghetti, as he thought of it. Finely wrought, I hope you agree. Now, to the crisis point, when he realizes, and the pickpocket realizes, that they both understand each other, and he follows Mr. Samler home. Everybody's nightmare in New York that year, that a large person of color, let's be honest, will follow you back and knows where you live and will come into your apartment. And while the doorman can't be bothered and is looking after the elevator, will say something, and Mr. Samler will say, "What's the matter? What do you want?" He was never to hear the black man's voice. He no more spoke than a puma would. Puma. What he did was to force Samler into a corner beside the long blackish carved table, a sort of Renaissance piece, by the buckling canvas of the old wall. There the man held Samler against the wall with his forearm. The umbrella fell to the floor with a sharp crack of the ferrule on the tile. It was ignored. The pickpocket unbuttoned himself. Samler heard the zipper descend. Then the smoke glasses were removed from Samler's face and dropped on the table. He was directed silently to look downward. I should rephrase that. He was directed silently to look downward. The black man had opened his fly and taken out his penis. It was displayed to Samler with the great oval testicles, a large tan and purple uncircumcised thing, a tube, a snake. Metallic hairs bristled at the thick base, and the tip curled beyond the supporting, demonstrating hand, suggesting the fleshy mobility of an elephant's trunk, though the skin was somewhat iridescent rather than thick or rough. Over the forearm and fist that held him, Samler was required to gaze at this organ. No compulsion would have been necessary. He would in any case have looked. Okay, you may think that's enough of that, but Bellow clearly wants you to be able to see it and, if you like, feel it. And he's taken the most daring allegory of what we used to call race relations, that it's really possible to imagine, not just street crime, though this time conducted by a man beautifully dressed and very elegant and very skillful, but the alleged sexual and, it has to be said, animal threat posed by, just in the minds of some white people, by African Americans, Africans in fact. Mr. Bellow, I haven't got time to dilate very much on this, but I'd like to say a few words, partly in his defense and partly in his criticism on this. Mr. Bellow, towards the end of his days, regretted what he'd said about the Tolstoy of the Zulus and the Proust of the Papuans, and actually said that one of the books that had most influenced him was a book about Chaka, the great Zulu king, a study of Chaka and the Zulu kingdom. And I don't think he was doing this just to make nice, because I know for other reasons that when he wrote Henderson the Rain King, one of his earliest novels, I hope some of you at least have read that. The only one, by the way, with a non-Jewish protagonist, a sort of Hemingway-esque adventure into Africa. That he read about 200 books about Africa in order to familiarize himself enough to do this, and took it very seriously and was very stirred by what he found. I think that what we're facing here with Mr. Samler and this antagonist is a very distraught allegory that became apparent to a number of people, or if it didn't become apparent, this is what I say in my essay in the Counter-Atlantic, began to occur as an allegory to a number of people in about 1969, which was that there was a connection somehow, maybe subliminal, between the battle between Israel and the Arabs in the Middle East, and between Jewish and black Americans in particularly Brooklyn, New York, and Chicago. If you remember, there was a famous strike in Ocean Hills that year. It went on for about 2 years. Jewish teachers against community control of schools, terrific accusations of an anti-Semitic kind made against Albert Shanker. Many of the slogans and banners replicating what was being said at the time in the occupied territories of the West Bank and Gaza. And I think this made to Bellow a mockery of what had been the old progressive idea of an alliance between black and Jewish people of a progressive kind. And you can find this in his book on Jerusalem and his non-fiction work, To Jerusalem and Back, where he rather describes Jerusalem as an embattled sea of civilization in the midst of an ocean of backwardness and barbarism. And you can pick up the echoes of it in many of his other works as well. And the best I can say in closing is that he registers it honestly, doesn't make any pretense of not feeling or not fearing what he knew many people were feeling and were fearing, doesn't appeal, in my judgment, to anything foul or bigoted or primitive in his reading, and feels above all the obligation to state honestly what is really on people's minds. And I hope that it will always be felt by the Atlantic that it's our job to face questions of this kind, however distraught they may seem. So thank you for listening, and thank you for coming. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Christopher.